The aluminum skeleton of the spotting scope dug into her shoulder. Cold. Not training ground cold, but the deep, wet chill of exposure that settled in bone. "Victor, this is Blackjack. Request Cass. Danger close. Repeat, danger close. How copy?" Static hissed in her ear. Her breath hitched, fogging the optic. Don't fog the optic. She wiped it with a frozen glove, the rough wool catching on the elevation turret. The world was reduced to a 10x circle of gray rock and blowing snow. 3 targets. No, not targets. Threats. They were moving up the ridge, bounding past the twisted metal of the observation tower, flanking the position where Trainee Locke lay. He wasn't moving. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the relentless thump, thump, thump of the enemy heavy machine gun suppressing them. This wasn't the qualification course. The smell of cordite and hot brass was real. The blood freezing on Locke's ghillie cape was real. The radio crackled again. The voice strained, terrified. It was Instructor Cadwell, the one who said she didn't have the nerve. "Sharma, if you read me, engage." She shifted the crosshairs. 1 mile was no longer a test. It was survival. 72 hours earlier, Forsyth Army Base, sniper qualification course. The cold was a liar. It didn't bite. It seeped. It crept through the seams of her utility uniform, past muscle, and settled into the marrow of her bones. Trainee Anya Sharma plunged her hands back into the concrete basin. The water was a slurry of mud, ice, and diesel fuel, designed to strip away human scent and dull the synthetic sheen of a new-issue ghillie suit. Around her, 20 other trainees did the same, their movements rhythmic, faces numb. The scrape, scrape, scrape of stiff brushes on canvas was the only sound in the gray dawn. This was the ghillie wash, the last ritual before the final test. Penance. Sharma scrubbed at a patch of jute, her knuckles raw. The smell of wet canvas and mildew filled her lungs. It was the smell of Phase 3, the smell of failure. Click. The memory was sharp, unwelcome. The final sim of Phase 2, a hostage scenario, a 400-meter shot, a time limit, a no-shoot target standing just 2 inches from the HVT. She'd had the shot. The math was good. The wind was 0, but she'd waited. Waited for that perfect moment of separation, that extra breath. The timer ran out. The instructor had simply tapped his stopwatch. "You're dead," he'd said, his voice bored. "The hostage is dead. The HVT is gone. Good math, Sharma. Terrible execution." Click. The sound of the empty chamber, the simulated failure, echoed louder in her head than any gunshot. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel behind the line of trainees. The scrubbing paused, then resumed, harder. Sergeant Cadwell. He moved down the line, a shadow against the fog. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence was a weight, pressing down on the air. He stopped, his boots perfectly aligned with the basin where Sharma worked. She didn't look up. She kept scrubbing. Scrape, scrape. "There are 2 types of people who come to this course," Cadwell said, his voice quiet, conversational, carrying farther than any yell. "Hunters, and those who are very, very good at hiding." He let the silence hang, broken only by the brushing. "Hiders are meticulous. They love the math. They love the camouflage. They love the idea of the shot." He stepped closer. Sharma could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. Hunters. They just love the hunt. He crouched, bringing his face level with hers. His eyes were pale, arctic blue and missed nothing. "The predator knows when to move," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The prey hesitates. It waits for the perfect moment. It calculates, and it dies." Sharma's jaw tightened. Her knuckles were white, gripping the brush. She met his gaze. The water dripped from her glove. A slow, steady tap, tap, tap on the concrete. "You have the best metrics in this class, trainee," he said, almost gently. "Best wind calls, best stalks, best hide construction. Top of the class, but I read your file." Phase 2, the click, she flinched. "You're a hider, Sharma," he stated. It wasn't an insult. It was a diagnosis. "You're afraid of the click. Out here, hesitation is a luxury. It's a betrayal. It gets people killed." He stood, his shadow falling over her again. "This final test isn't about the math. We already know you can do the math. This is about instinct. It's about whether, when the 90-second window opens, you are a predator or prey." He moved on. The scrubbing resumed down the line, a little faster, a little more frantic. Sharma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It fogged in the air. The cold, which had been a dull ache, now felt sharp, invasive. A plastic brush was thrust into her basin. She looked up. Trainee Locke, her spotter, was beside her, his own suit already bundled. He was wiry, quiet, with eyes that seemed to absorb light. He didn't say anything. He just pushed the fresh brush toward her. Hers was worn flat, and went back to his own work. It was enough. It was the only support this place allowed. She took the new brush. She plunged her ghillie suit, her second skin, back into the freezing water, the weight of it trying to pull her under. She fought the weight, just as she fought Cadwell's words. "All right, listen up," Cadwell's voice boomed from the front. "Final brief in 10. Weather officer says a storm front is moving in. We're advancing the timeline." He paused. "Sharma, Locke, you're lane 13, the ridgeline." A few trainees shifted, glancing at her. Lane 13, the Jackal's graveyard, 1,800-meter shot, plagued by cross canyons and downdrafts. The hardest lane, the one reserved for washing people out. Cadwell hadn't just diagnosed her. He had signed the prescription. Locke just nodded, his face grim. "All right," he said quietly, looking at Sharma. "Let's go get our rifles." Sharma pulled the heavy, sodden suit from the water. It felt like armor, or a shroud. She wasn't sure which. The briefing room smelled of stale air and floor wax. It was a sterile box, insulated from the rising wind outside. Sharma sat in the back row, Locke beside her, their newly cleaned ghillie suits stowed in their packs, still damp. She focused on the red glow of the projector. A PowerPoint slide titled Phase 3, Final Qualification, Live Fire, dominated the front wall. "Listen up," Cadwell commanded, his voice sharp, cutting through the low murmur. He stood beside the screen, a laser pointer in his hand. "This is not Phase 2. There are no resets. There are no do-overs. You fail an objective. You are dropped from the course. Am I clear?" A chorus of hoo-ah filled the room. Sharma's was quiet, lost in the crowd. Cadwell clicked to the next slide. Rules of engagement. "This is what separates us from murderers," he said, his voice hard. "ROE is not optional, it is absolute." He paced as he spoke. 1. Positive identification. PID. I don't care what your spotter says. I don't care what you think you see. You must have 100% PID of your target before your finger ever thinks about moving to the trigger. You smoke a civilian, a friendly, or any non-combatant, and I will personally ensure you are scrubbing latrines for the rest of your contract. Sharma's hands, resting on her knees, clenched. PID. The very thing that had made her hesitate. 2. Collateral damage, Cadwell continued. Your target is a simulated HVT, He will be accompanied by 2 hostage mannequins. Your shot must be clean. Hit a hostage, you fail. Damage the structure, you fail. This is a surgical test. He clicked again. A map appeared. Jackal's Gap. 13 lanes were marked in red, snaking up into the mountains. Her eyes immediately found lane 13. It was the longest, the most exposed, terminating at a rocky ridgeline 1,800 meters from the target zone. 2-man teams, Cadwell said. You will infiltrate under cover of darkness. You will establish an FFP. You will wait. He let that word hang. Wait. The sniper's true enemy. At 0900, 48 hours from now, your target window opens. It will remain open for exactly 90 seconds. Sharma's breath caught. 90 seconds. Not an hour. Not 10 minutes. 90 seconds to find the target. Get PID. Account for the wind on lane 13. Coordinate with Locke. And fire 1. Perfect shot. Her mind raced. The wind on the ridgeline. 2 canyons. It creates a vector shift. The calculation. You look worried, Sharma. The room went silent. Cadwell's laser pointer was off, but his gaze felt just as focused, pinning her to the back wall. She straightened. No, Sergeant. No. 90 seconds isn't a long time for someone who likes to think. Her face burned, but she held his gaze. It's enough time, Sergeant. A flicker of something, impatience perhaps, crossed his face. We'll see. He turned back to the screen. One last thing. The weather officer is predicting a significant storm front. This is a gift. Use it for infiltration. But it also means comms will be spotty. He clicked to the final slide. It was blank, save for one line. MCON, 24 hours. To add a layer of realism, Cadwell said, his voice casual. All teams will maintain strict emissions control for the first 24 hours. No radio traffic. None. You are dark. You are behind the lines. You are alone. You will not power on your radios until 0700 tomorrow, to check in for the final brief. A new kind of cold, separate from the Gilly wash, settled on Sharma. 24 hours, no contact, no support. Just her, Locke, and the rising storm. It was a standard procedure for deep infiltration, but Cadwell's emphasis felt personal. It was another layer of pressure, another way to isolate her, to test her breaking point. She looked at the map of lane 13, 1,800 meters, unpredictable wind, a 90-second window, and now, 24 hours of total isolation. This is the test, Cadwell finished, his Arctic eyes sweeping the room. This is the line. Half of you won't cross it. Prove me wrong. He shut off the projector. The room plunged into the gray, dim light of the storm. Gear up. Phase 3 is live in 30. Good hunting. Chairs scraped. The room filled with the sound of buckles clicking, packs being shouldered. Locke stood, his face unreadable. Lane 13, he said, his voice low. Just our luck. Sharma stood, shouldering her 70-pound pack. The rifle, snug in its scabbard, felt like an anchor. It's just math, Locke, she said, her voice tighter than she wanted. Right, he replied, not sounding convinced. Just math. She walked out of the sterile briefing room and into the wind. It tore at her uniform, smelling of pine and snow and ozone. It was real. And for the next 24 hours, it would be their only companion. Darkness was a shroud. Not the gentle dark of a barracks, but a thick, oppressive blackness, amplified by the storm clouds devouring the moon. The wind howled, a physical force that shoved at Sharma's 70-pound pack, trying to peel her from the mountainside. They were 3 hours into the stalk. 3 hours, and they had covered maybe 800 meters. This was lane 13. It wasn't a lane. It was a jagged scar of scree and shattered granite. Sharma moved her left foot. She didn't place it. She tested it, easing the weight onto the ball of her foot, feeling for the shift of rock, the telltale crunch of loose gravel. The instructors, the op4, were out there, hidden in the black, their night vision optics scanning for just such a mistake. She found a solid purchase, transferred her weight, and began the agonizingly slow process of moving her right knee. Her world was reduced to the 3 feet of ground in front of her. Behind her, she heard Locke's breathing, perfectly timed with her own. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Move. It was the sniper's crawl, a rhythm of patience, a sharp edge of granite dug through her uniform, pressing into her hip bone. She ignored it. The cold was a constant, biting at her exposed skin, numbing her gloved fingers. She flexed them, forcing blood into the tips. Numb fingers couldn't feel a trigger. The weight of Locke's trust felt heavier than her pack. He was a good spotter. He'd washed out of his first attempt at the course, not for lack of skill, but for challenging an instructor on a bad wind call. He'd been right, but being right didn't matter. He was back, quiet, determined. He didn't deserve to be saddled with Cadwell's hider. Scrape. The sound was faint, metal on rock, 50 meters to their right. Sharma froze. She didn't just stop moving. She ceased to exist. She flattened herself against the ground, merging with the shadows of the rock, her ghillie veil pulled over her rifle. She held her breath, listening. The wind moaned, covering all sound. Beside her, Locke was a motionless lump of vegetation. She waited. 1 minute. 2. Nothing. Just the wind and the far-off ghostly sound of a branch snapping, an animal or an op4 testing them. She let her breath out, not in a sigh, but in a slow, controlled stream that wouldn't fog. She began to move again. Meters per hour. After another hour, they reached a small defilade, a shallow dip that offered minimal cover from the wind but maximum concealment from observation. This was their pre-planned observation post. From here, they would wait for first light to confirm their FFP on the ridgeline, still 500 meters above them. They slid into the depression, back to back, offering 360-degree security. The pack came off, the relief of the weight almost making her dizzy. She carefully unzipped a side pouch and pulled out her spotting scope, setting it up on its miniature tripod, keeping it low. They were dark. No comms, no heat. Just 2 ghosts in the storm. Good movement. Locke's voice was barely a whisper, pitched to travel no more than the 2 feet between them. Heard you slip, she whispered back, scanning the dark ridgeline. That was me, he admitted. Small slide. You heard it? 50 meters back. Thought it was op4. Locke was silent for a moment. He shifted the nylon of his pack, whispering. You heard that over this wind. Cadwell's wrong about you, Sharma. She kept her eye pressed to the scope, the rubber cup cold against her skin. He's right. I hesitated. I choked. The admission tasted like ash. No, Locke said, his voice firm, low. I read the AAR. You had 2 inches. 2. You were processing the collateral. You didn't hesitate. You were being precise. There's a difference. She stopped scanning. She turned her head, though. She couldn't see his face in the dark. Cadwell, Locke continued. He's old school. He thinks this job is about instinct, about being a wolf. He's not wrong, not entirely. But it's changing. It's about math now. It's about data. It's about seeing too much and filtering it down to one perfect shot. That's not hesitation, Sharma. That's your process. He leaned closer. This course, it's designed to break you, to make you doubt that process. Don't let it. Trust it. His words landed, settling into the cold space her self-doubt had occupied. It was the first time anyone had reframed her flaw as a strength. It was a lifeline. She turned back to the scope. The world was still black, the wind still sharp, but the weight on her shoulders felt different. It wasn't just her pack or Locke's trust. It was the burden of her own precision. "First light in 90 minutes, she whispered. "We need to identify the FFP before the storm crests." "Copy," Locke replied. They fell into the sniper's silence, a shared patience. Sharma watched the darkness, her finger resting on the cold steel of her rifle. The wind howled, and the first stinging pellets of ice and snow began to fall. The storm was here. First light was a cruel joke. It wasn't light. It was a transition from absolute black to a swirling, claustrophobic gray. The storm had crested. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed, a high-pitched, abrasive noise that vibrated in Sharma's teeth. "There," Sharma said, her voice swallowed by the gale. She pointed, not with her hand, but with her chin. Locke, lying beside her, pressed his eye to his own scope. "The V-notch, 500 meters up." It was a miserable spot, a cluster of granite boulders on the main ridgeline, shaped like a gun sight. It offered a clear line of sight to the target zone, 1,800 meters away, but it was completely exposed to the wind. It was the only option. They moved, the stalk degrading into a desperate, low-crouched scramble against the storm. The wind tore at them, ice pellets stinging any exposed skin like needles. They reached the V-notch and collapsed into the meager shelter it provided. This was their final firing position. For the next 30 hours, this 2-meter by 1-meter patch of frozen rock was their world. "Hasty hide," Locke grunted, pulling the camouflage netting from his pack. "No time to dig in." "Won't matter," Sharma replied, her words clipped. "This storm will cover us better than 3 feet of earth." They worked with grim, economic movements. They stretched the netting, anchoring it to the rocks with carabiners, weighing the edges with loose stones. They draped their ghillie veils over the top, creating a low, cramped cocoon. It was pathetic, but it broke the wind. Sharma slid into position, her rifle already set up on its bipod. She chambered around. The snick of the bolt was solid, comforting. She settled behind the scope. Locke nestled beside her with his spotting scope. The 24-hour comms dark period began. The target area, 1,800 meters away, was a ghostly landscape of gray and white. She could just make out the mock-up terrorist compound, a few concrete structures, and a watchtower. No movement. "Clock's running," Locke said. His job now was to observe, to rest, to be her second set of eyes. Her job was to wait. The first hour was tense, the adrenaline of the insertion fading, replaced by a sharp, focused awareness. The fourth hour was agony. The cold was no longer an external force, it was internal. It lived in her joints, in her lungs. Her fingers, even in thermal gloves, were wooden stumps. She had to constantly flex them, balling them into fists and releasing, a painful, throbbing process of forcing the blood to move. Click. The memory of her failure returned, unbidden. "You're a hider." She squeezed her eyes shut, then forced them open. "Focus." She stared through the optic. The swirling snow created phantom movements. Was that an op-4? She held her breath, analyzed the shape. No, just a branch, whipped by the wind. This is the test, she thought. Cadwell had been right about this, at least. This was the mental game, the loneliness, the ability to stay focused when every instinct screamed to move, to seek warmth, to do something. Swap, she grunted. My watch, Locke replied. They traded optics. She took the spotter. He settled behind the rifle. A 5-minute break for her eyes, nothing more. She pulled her data on previous engagement book from her breast pocket. The waterproof paper was stiff, the pencil slippery in her numb glove. She began to write. Wind, gustin 30-40 knots, variable, temp, est, 5 CW chill. The calculations were a refuge. She focused on the math, the pure, clean logic of it. The math didn't care if she was cold. The math didn't care about Cadwell. Trust the process. Locke's words. The 10th hour, darkness fell again. The storm intensified. The wind wasn't a scream now. It was a physical impact, a solid wall of noise that hammered their tiny hide. The netting thwopped and cracked like a bullwhip. This is... Locke's voice was tight. This is worse than the brief. It's just wind, Sharma said, trying to believe it. It's a blizzard. We're in a blizzard, Sharma. The calm's dark rule, which had been a tactical constraint, now felt like a death sentence. If an Op-4 did find them, they couldn't call for a sim kill. If one of them succumbed to hypothermia, they couldn't call for extraction. They were completely, utterly alone. The test had become a fight for survival. Sharma checked her watch. Euro 600, 1 hour until the comms window opened. They had made it through the night. Your fingers, she said. What? Show me. Locke reluctantly held up his hand. Even in the dim gray light, she could see it. The tips of his index and middle fingers were a dead, waxy white. Frostnip. The precursor to frostbite. Fists, she ordered. Now. He began to bawl and release his fists. It's fine. It's not fine. You lose those, you can't run the scope. Pump your arms, get the blood moving. He did as he was told, his movements stiff. The cold was winning. Sharma turned back to her rifle scope, the frustration a bitter taste in her mouth. She was meticulous, she was prepared, but she couldn't control the weather. She looked at her watch. Yo 6:58. She reached for the radio, her frozen thumb fumbling with the switch. This was it. Check in. Get the final update. Confirm the 0900 window. She switched it on. 070. Blackjack, this is Victor 13. Radio check, over. The radio answered. It wasn't Cadwell's voice. It wasn't static from the storm. It was a harsh, deafening electronic roar, a powerful rhythmic jamming signal that pulsed with intelligent design. Locke stopped moving his hands. He stared at the radio. That's not the storm, he whispered. Sharma felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the temperature. She cycled the channels, all of them, the same roaring pulse. This wasn't a test. This was sophisticated military-grade electronic countermeasures. Blackjack, this is Victor 13. She tried again, her voice urgent. How copy? Only the jamming replied. They were still dark, and they were still alone. The electronic roar filled their tiny hide. It was a clean, synthetic sound, utterly alien to the organic chaos of the storm. Sharma's thumb cycled the frequency dial. Nothing, just the persistent, pulsing signal. It's ECM, she said, her voice flat. Heavy. This isn't on the gear list. Locke leaned over, listening to the speaker, his frost-nipped fingers forgotten. It's Cadwell. It has to be. He sounded unconvinced. He's upping the stakes, trying to rattle us before the shot. EW simulation. Sharma shook her head. Her gut clenched. No. The power draw? To generate that strong a signal in this storm, you'd need a dedicated platform. That's not a test. That's an operation. So what? Locke challenged, his voice tight with the cold. We stick to the mission. We're dark. We wait for the 0900 window. And if the window never opens? If the test is compromised? Sharma argued, the old hesitation creeping in. Am I overthinking? Is this the test? Doubting the parameters? She looked at Locke. He was right. Their orders were to observe the target zone, but her instincts, the very ones Cadwell claimed she lacked, were screaming. The target's dead, she said, making a decision. What? It's 1,800 meters in a blizzard. You can't see. The target zone is dead, she clarified, her voice hardening. It's not the objective, not anymore. Before Locke could protest, she shifted her body, the movement agonizing on frozen muscles. She broke the cardinal rule of a hide. She repositioned her rifle, angling it away from the distant target zone and traversing it hard left, toward their own base. Sharma, what are you doing? Locke hissed. That's not the lane. The OP4 will see the shift. The OP4 is down there, she whispered, her eye already pressed to the optic. Forsyth Army Base was 3,000 meters away, a sprawling complex in the valley below their ridgeline. At this range, it was just a collection of smudged, snow-covered shapes. She dialed the magnification on her scope to maximum, the 25x power punching through the swirling snow, the image wavering in the wind. I see nothing, just snow, Locke said, his own spotting scope trained on the same area. Wait. Sharma's voice was a low command. She held her breath, letting the image swim, her mind filtering the noise. The wind, the snow, the shapes. Trust the process. There, near the main comms array, the cluster of antennae that linked the base to the outside world, was a shadow. It was too clean, too symmetrical. I have a vehicle, she murmured, near the comms tower. Looks like a BTR. A what? No, that's a striker. It's the QRF parked. It's not a striker, Locke. Her voice was ice. The meticulous, obsessive study she'd put in, the part of her Cadwell mocked, was paying off. The wheel spacing is wrong. The hull is too low, 8x8, sloped front. It's... Her blood ran colder than the wind. There's another one, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Moving near the main gate, no markings, winter camo, but it's clean, too clean. These were not U.S. vehicles. They were not part of any training inventory. They were real, they were active, and they were sitting on top of the base's communication hub. The jamming signal wasn't a test. It was an electronic siege. Locke swung his scope, his breathing audible now, a ragged puff of white fog. I see it. I see God. Sharma. Who are they? Sharma didn't answer. Her eye was still glued to the scope, scanning, her mind processing the impossible. The base should be on high alert. Alarms, flashing lights, men pouring from the barracks. There was nothing. The base was asleep. A single, terrible thought crystallized in her mind. They're already inside. She looked at her watch. 07:15. The ZO9's do target window, the ROE, the test. It was all a lie. It was a distraction. While they were isolated, freezing on the ridgeline, the base was being taken. Get your radio, she said. It's jammed. It's... Get it, she ordered, her voice no longer a trainee's. Not the short range. The SATCOM, the emergency beacon. We're not comms dark anymore, Locke. We're the only ones who can see this. Locke's face was pale, his eyes wide, fixed on the alien shapes in his scope. Holy... The world had just tilted. The ground, which had been a test, was now a battlefield. Locke fumbled with his pack, his frost-nipped fingers struggling with the frozen buckles, retrieving the emergency SATCOM. Sharma never took her eye from the rifle, scope, The 3,000-meter view was like watching a silent movie, a pantomime of violence. "The motor pool," she said, her voice a dead monotone. "Movement. 4, no, 5 figures. White camo. They're moving toward the barracks." "I see them," Locke breathed, his own scope now steady. "Who are they? They move like us." They moved better than us, Sharma thought. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. They moved in perfect bounding overwatch, covering sectors, fluid and economical. They were professionals. Then she saw it. A lone figure emerged from the mess hall, likely a guard on his rounds, coffee mug in hand. He saw the fire team. He dropped the mug. She watched the dark splash on the snow. He raised his rifle. He never got the shot off. A suppressed crack, so faint on the wind it was almost imaginary, and the guard crumpled. 2 members of the fire team didn't even break stride. They simply moved past him, while the rearmost member paused, pumped 2 more rounds into the body, and then sprinted to catch up. Confirmation. Brutal. Efficient. Sharma's stomach lurched. The coffee she'd had 6 hours ago burned in her throat. This is not a test. The thought repeated, a dull thud against her skull. The click of her Phase 2 failure. This was the cost of a real click. "They're executing them," Locke whispered, his voice cracking. "They're executing the guards." "Main gate," Sharma redirected, forcing the sickness down. "The BTRs. They're moving." The 2 armored vehicles, which had been static, now rolled forward, parting to allow a third vehicle, a truck equipped with a complex antenna array, to park directly beside the comms tower, the source of the jamming. "They're not just jamming," Sharma said, her mind racing, connecting the pieces. "They're inside. They're in the wire. This is a coordinated assault." The puzzle snapped into place. The storm, the isolation of the sniper teams, the comms dark rule. It wasn't Cadwell's test. It was the enemy's cover. They had used the sniper qualification course as a Trojan horse, knowing the base's best Overwatch teams would be deployed, isolated and silent. "Cadwell," Locke said, his voice frantic. "The other teams. They're all in hides, blind. They're walking into a kill zone." He had the SATCOM in his hands. He looked at Sharma, his eyes wide with terror and resolve. "We have to warn them. We have to break ROE." "Locke, don't," Sharma said. But the words were weak. "We're witnesses, Sharma. We're the only ones who see." "If you transmit, they'll triangulate us," she pleaded, her tactical mind fighting her human one. "That ECM truck? They're not just jamming, they're listening. They'll know this position." "I don't care," Locke said. He flipped the safety cap on the beacon. "This is Blackjack!" He yelled into the handset, his voice raw against the wind. "This is Victor 1-3. We are compromised. Base is under attack. I repeat, base is under attack by unknown hostiles. Real world. Break! Break!" He thumbed the transmitter. For a moment, there was only the wind and the electronic roar from their other radio. Then, the roar changed. It stopped pulsing. It focused, honing in on their signal like a hawk. "They heard us," Sharma said, a cold certainty gripping her. "Good," Locke said, his face a mask of defiant terror. "Let them hear." He raised the radio again. "Blackjack, how copy? We are under ATT." The world exploded. A high-pitched, tearing shriek cut through the storm, a sound that arrived a split second before the impact. A mortar. The round hit 50 meters short of their hide, detonating with a deafening crump that punched the air from Sharma's lungs. Snow, rock, and ice erupted upwards. Shrapnel snapped and whined over their heads, cutting through the camouflage netting. In fucking coming! Locke screamed, dropping the radio and covering his head. They weren't witnesses anymore. They were targets. Bug out! Bug out! Locke yelled, stuffing the radio into his pack, his voice tight with adrenaline. There was no thought, only training. Sharma grabbed her rifle. She didn't bother to collapse the bipod or sling it. She just grabbed it, the 25-pound weight a familiar burden. They burst from the hide, shredding the camouflage netting, and plunged into the open blizzard. The relative quiet of their cocoon was gone, replaced by the full, deafening roar of the storm and the snap, snap, snap of rifle rounds. They're on the ridge below us, Locke shouted, pointing. Suppressing! They weren't aiming to kill. Not yet. They were hurting them, pinning them. A second mortar shell shrieked. This one was closer. The whump of it leaving the tube was lost in the wind, but the incoming sound was a personal, intimate threat. Get down! Sharma screamed. She dove, curling her body around the rifle, protecting the optic with her chest. The world flashed white. The explosion was a physical blow, a concussive force that slammed her against the frozen ground. The air filled with the smell of ozone and cordite. Rock fragments rained down on her back. She pushed herself up, her ears ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned the storm. Locke! Status! He was 10 feet away, a crumpled shape in the snow. He wasn't moving. Locke! She scrambled toward him, her knees sinking into the deep drift. The ringing in her ears subsided, replaced by a sound she would never forget. A low, wet, agonizing scream. My leg, he gasped, his teeth gritted, his face a shocking waxy white. Sharma, my leg. She looked. His left leg below the knee was a ruin. The utility trousers were shredded, soaked in a dark, arterial red that was already steaming in the cold. A jagged piece of shrapnel, the size of her hand, was embedded in the snow beside him, its edges slick with blood. Her training screamed tourniquet. Her mind screamed run. The hunting party, the fire team, would be moving on them now. Okay, she said, her voice shaking. She unclipped the pack from his back, her frozen fingers fumbling with the strap. We're moving. I'm getting you out. No, he grunted, his eyes wide with pain and a terrible clarity. No, you're not. Shut up, Locke. She ripped her own tourniquet from her kit. I'm not leaving you. They're coming, he breathed, his hand groping for his pack. The rifle fire was closer now, more accurate. The thwack of rounds hitting the rocks around them. They're bounding up the draw, 5 minutes, maybe less. I can drag you. Drag me where? He yelled, the pain giving his voice a raw edge. To another rock so we can die together? You're the asset, Sharma, not me. You have the rifle. You have the eyes, I'm just… Wait. He shoved his pack toward her. The one with the SATCOM. Take it. Take the radio. Get to the fallback. The nest. You know the route. Call it in. Call in the cavalry. Locke. Go! He roared, a terrible, desperate command. He drew his M17 sidearm from its holster, his hand shaking, not from cold, but from shock. That's an order, trainee, go! His words hit her harder than the mortar. Trainee. He was reminding her of her place, of the mission, of the cold, hard logic they had been taught. The team, the mission, then the man. He was sacrificing himself, the one person who had believed in her process. She stared at him, at the blood pooling in the snow, at the useless pistol in his hand. Her mind flashed to the click failure, the hostage, the hesitation. This was the same choice. Her partner, or the mission. The snap of a round passing her ear, so close it tugged at her hair, made the decision. I'm sorry, she whispered. She grabbed his pack. She grabbed her rifle. She stood up. Sharma, he yelled. She looked back at him, one last time. He was propped up on one elbow, his face a mask of agony. She turned and ran. She plunged into the swirling gray, her heart a block of ice in her chest. Every step felt like a betrayal. Every gust of wind carried his scream. She ran. It was not a stalk. It was not a tactical movement. It was a panicked, stumbling flight, fueled by adrenaline and self-loathing. She plunged through waist-deep snowdrifts, scrambled over ice-slicked rocks, her lungs burning, the 70-pound pack and rifle a monstrous shifting weight. The wind was a solid wall, tearing at her, shoving her, its scream a mirror of her own internal silence. Coward. Hider. You ran. Behind her she heard them, shouts, not English. A harsh, guttural language, the Scylla team. They were moving fast, unencumbered, hunting her. The crack-thwack of rounds impacted the snow around her. They were close. 500 meters, maybe less. She slipped, her boot finding a patch of sheer ice. She went down hard, her hips slamming into the granite. The rifle flew from her grasp. Pain, sharp and white-hot, shot up her side. She lay in the snow, the breath knocked out of her, gasping like a fish. The world was a swirl of white. This is it. I'm dead. I left him, and now I'm dead. She saw them, 3 figures moving in the gray, fanning out, closing the distance. They were 400 meters out, methodical, rifles at the ready. She reached for her rifle. Her hand closed on the sling. She started to pull it toward her. Pop, pop, pop. The sound was thin, pathetic against the storm. A pistol, an M17. It came from behind her, from the rocks she had just fled. Locke, the 3 hunters, stopped. They dropped to a knee, seeking cover, their attention instantly shifting. Pop, pop! He was firing at them. A pistol at 400 meters in a blizzard. It was useless. It was hopeless. It wasn't an attack. It was a distraction. He was drawing their fire. One of the hunters raised his rifle and fired a short, controlled burst toward Locke's position. The heavy thump-thump of the assault rifle echoed across the pass. Pop. Locke fired back. You're the asset, Sharma. Go! His voice, his final order, ripped through her panic. He wasn't just dying. He was buying her time. He was trading his last moments in agony for her seconds. The hunters were no longer moving toward her. They were advancing on Locke, firing as they went, treating him as the primary threat. A new kind of cold flooded Sharma's body. It was not the wind. It was not the snow. It was a terrible, quiet, clarifying rage. The guilt didn't vanish. It calcified. It hardened from panic into purpose. You will not waste this. She grabbed her rifle. The pain in her hip was a distant signal. She ignored it. She pushed herself to her feet, not as a fleeing victim, but as a soldier. She didn't run down the mountain toward the base. That was the escape route. That was what they'd expect. She ran up. She scrambled up a near-vertical chimney of rock. The Scylla team's fire now entirely focused on Locke's position. She used the terrain, the skills from the infiltration. Her movements low, fast, animalistic. She was no longer running from them. She was moving to a position above them. The last faint pop of Locke's pistol was cut short by a final sustained burst of automatic fire. Then, silence. The wind howled, covering the sound, but she knew. He was gone. Sharma clawed her way to a small ledge, 200 meters above the draw where Locke lay. She belly-crawled into a cleft between 2 boulders, the snowdrifts protecting her. She was breathing hard, hot tears freezing on her cheeks, but her hands were steady. She deployed the bipod. She settled the rifle butt into her shoulder. She chambered around. She looked through the scope. The three hunters were standing in a loose triangle around Locke's body. One of them nudged him with his boot. The second was on his radio. The third was scanning, looking for her. They thought she was gone. They thought the threat was neutralized. They were wrong. The panic was gone. The hesitation was gone. The hider was gone. There was only the predator. The rage was a furnace. It burned away the tears, the cold, the biting pain in her hip. It consumed the panic, leaving behind something hard and pure, a cold, quiet certainty. She lay in the cleft of rock, her breath pluming in front of her, then vanishing in the wind. She was a ghost. She was a shadow. And down below, in the draw, the three men who had murdered her partner were exposed. They were still clustered around Locke's body. The one with the radio was talking, pointing up the mountain in the direction she had been running. The other two were reloading, topping off their magazines. Arrogant, confident. They thought the fight was over. They thought she was a recruit, fleeing in terror. "You're a hider, Sharma," Cadwell's voice. This time, it wasn't an insult. It was an affirmation. She was a hider, and they would never see her. She began to move, not her body, just her eyes. She scanned the terrain around them. The wind was a river, flowing right to left, gusting, carrying snow. The distance, 400 meters? No. She checked her scope's reticle, ranging them against the height of the man on the radio. 420 meters. Her mind, which had been a storm of guilt and fear, became a quiet, empty room. There was only the math. 420 meters, uphill shot, temp, 5C, wind, full value, 20 knots, gusting 30. The calculations came to her, not as a struggle, but as a simple, clear fact, like breathing. Trust the process. Locke's voice, a calm echo in the storm of her rage. The three men began to move. They split up. The radio man and one rifleman started moving down the draw, back toward the base. The third man, the team leader, lingered. He was scanning the ridgeline where she had fallen. He was the threat. He was the smart one. She had to take him first, but they were separating. She couldn't engage all three. Patience. She waited. The team leader finished his scan and turned to follow his men. He was the trail element. No. Wait. She watched them. They moved with the same fluid efficiency as the team at the base. One moved, the other two covered. They would not be easy. She had to separate them. She had to use the one thing they didn't have. They didn't know this mountain. She did. She had spent 30 hours studying every rock, every dip, every wind channel from her hide. She had infiltrated this ground in total darkness. She began to crawl, moving backward out of the cleft, keeping her rifle pointed toward the enemy. She slid over the snow, a slow, agonizing movement. She was not moving away. She was repositioning, paralleling them, using a higher ridge to mask her movement. The wind was her ally. It covered the shuss of her body sliding on the snow. The blizzard was her camouflage. It broke her outline. She moved for 10 minutes. It felt like 10 seconds. The pain in her hip was a dull, hot throb, but it was distant. It didn't matter. She found her new position, a narrow slit in the rock, overlooking a choke point in the canyon 500 meters below. The place where Lane 13 narrowed. They would have to pass through it. She settled in, deployed the bipod, ranged the far side of the choke point, 550 meters. She dialed her elevation turret. The click, click, click was sharp, metallic, final. She waited. The fury did not cool. It compressed. It became the stillness in her hands. It became the focus in her eye. She was not a trainee. She was not a hider. She was a sniper, and this was her hunting ground. The first two men appeared, moving into the choke point. They were dark shapes against the snow, moving quickly. The team leader followed, 30 seconds behind. He was the one. He was the anchor. Take him out, and the other two would be disorganized. She watched him. He paused, scanning the rocks above him. He was good. He felt her. He couldn't see her, but he knew. A predator's instinct. Mine is better, she thought. She lined up the shot. The crosshairs settled on his center mass. She exhaled, half her breath, and found the natural respiratory pause. Click. The memory of her failure. She ignored it. The wind, the math, the target. The team leader turned, looking directly up at her position. He hadn't seen her. He was just scanning. Now. She moved the crosshairs 2 inches left into the wind. Her finger was steady. Her heart was a slow, heavy drum. She was no longer the prey. The team leader stood in her crosshairs, a dark shape against the swirling snow. He was looking up, scanning the ridge, his instincts screaming. He knew something was wrong. He was too late. Sharma's world compressed to the 10-power circle of glass. There was no Cadwell. There was no test. There was no past. There was only the math, the wind, and the target. Her finger rested on the trigger, the cold metal a familiar pressure. Click. The memory tried to surface. The hesitation, the failure. She exhaled. You will not waste this. She pressed. The click did not come. It was replaced by a boom that tore through the mountain air, a deep, concussive report that slammed the rifle butt back into her shoulder. The recoil was solid, real. It was the antithesis of failure. She did not wait to admire her shot. Her hand, moving on pure instinct, cycled the bolt. Up, back. The brass casing ejected, a spinning gold comma in the gray light, disappearing into the snow. Forward, down. The bolt slid home, chambering a new round. The entire action was one fluid, mechanical motion, completed before the sound of her first shot had finished echoing. She was already back on the scope. The team leader was gone. A red smear marked the snow where he had stood. The other two men were reacting. They had dropped, scrambling for cover, but they didn't know where the shot had come from. The canyon walls were playing tricks with the sound. One of them, the radio man, broke cover, making a dash for a large boulder. Bad choice. He was 530 meters. Moving. Wind. She didn't calculate. She knew. She held 2 mils left of his chest and pressed. Boom. The recoil jolted her. She cycled the bolt again. Up, back, forward, down. She was back on target. The radio man was down, his legs tangled in the snow, his body still. One left. The third man was behind a low rock, firing blind up the canyon, spraying rounds in a wide, panicked arc. He was suppressed. He was alone. Sharma watched him. He stopped firing. He was yelling into his comms, his voice lost to the wind. He was calling for a report that would never come. She centered the crosshairs on the edge of the rock he was hiding behind. She waited. The cold was nothing. The pain in her hip was nothing. She was the granite. She was the ice. He peeked. It was all she needed. A sliver of his helmet and shoulder. Boom! The round hit the rock, not him. A high-pitched ricochet and a spray of stone fragments. He ducked back. She had missed. A flicker of the old panic. You missed. No. She hadn't missed. She had herded him. The man, believing her position was higher, broke from the other side of the rock, running low, trying to get to the cover of the canyon wall. He was running directly into the clear. Sharma shifted her rifle, the bipod leg skidding slightly on the ice. She found him, 600 meters. Breathe. She exhaled. The crosshairs settled. Press, boom, the jolt, the cycle, up, back, forward, down. She returned to the scope. He was a still, dark shape in the white. Silence. The wind howled, rushing in to fill the vacuum left by the violence. The smell of cordite and hot brass hung in the air around her, sharp and chemical. She had done it. There was no triumph, no adrenaline rush, just a vast, cold, profound emptiness. She had taken 3 human lives, the click she had feared so much. It wasn't a failure to act. It was the fear of this cold, mechanical efficiency, this nothingness. She lay there for a long time, a minute, an hour. The storm didn't care. She had proven Cadwell wrong. She wasn't a hider. She wasn't prey. She was a killer. The thought settled on her, heavier than her pack, colder than the snow. She forced her body to move. The pain in her hip returned, sharp and demanding. She slid back from the ledge, her limbs stiff, wooden. She shouldered her rifle. She picked up Locke's pack. She had to keep moving. The base was still lost. She pulled Locke's radio from the pack, the SATCOM. She switched it on. The speaker hissed. "Repeat. This is Blackjack Actual. We are pinned. Kilo Barracks. Any Victor call sign on this net? How copy?" The voice was ragged, strained, static-filled. She knew that voice. It was Sergeant Cadwell. "Blackjack, this is Victor 1-3. I read you," Sharma said into the SATCOM, her voice a raw croak. The radio hissed. 1-3? Is that Sharma? What's your sitrep? Victor 1-3 is 1 KIO, she said, the words tasting like metal. Locke is gone. I engaged a 3-man team. They're gone too. A long, static-filled pause. Cadwell's voice returned, strained, weaker. Copy 1-3. Good work. Fall back. Fall back to the nest. We're pinned. On my way. She didn't wait for a reply. She stowed the radio and forced herself to stand. The 800 meters to the nest, a fortified concrete observation bunker built into the reverse slope of the main ridge, was open ground. It was a killing field. The adrenaline from the firefight was gone, leaving a deep, trembling exhaustion in its wake. The cold, which her rage had held at bay, flooded back in. The pain in her hip was a sharp, stabbing throb with every step. She moved, not as a hunter, but as a ghost. She slid from boulder to boulder, using the swirling snow as her veil. Every shadow looked like a Scylla patrol. Every gust of wind sounded like a shout. The emptiness of her actions settled on her. The 3 men, the thud of the rounds hitting, the way they had fallen. It replayed in her mind, a silent, sickening loop. She had taken life. She had crossed a line that had no return. There was no click. There was just the boom and the silence that followed. And Locke, his scream, his blood on the snow, his final desperate order. She had run. She had left him. She had killed for him. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like a debt that could never be repaid. She half slid, half fell down a snow-covered scree slope, landing hard at the base. The nest was just ahead, a low, concrete slit in the mountainside, its steel door slightly ajar. She approached it with her rifle raised. This was a fallback, but it could also be a trap. "Sergeant," she called, her voice low. "Get in!" The reply was a pained grunt. She slid through the narrow opening, the heavy steel door groaning, and pushed it shut. The thud of it locking felt final. The inside of the bunker was dark, lit only by a single flickering red emergency bulb. It smelled of concrete, ozone, and copper. The smell of blood. Sergeant Cadwell was slumped against the far wall. His rifle lay across his lap. His left leg was propped up on an ammo can, the trouser leg ripped open. A field dressing was soaked through with dark, arterial blood. Shrapnel. He looked up at her. His face, illuminated by the pulsing red light, was gray, beaded with sweat despite the cold. The man who had stalked the Gilly Wash like a predator, the man whose voice was a weapon, was shaking. The dynamic hung in the air, thick and heavy. The student and the master, the hider and the hunter. The power had inverted. "You're alive," he breathed. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of disbelief. "You're hit," she stated, dropping Locke's pack and moving toward him. "It's fine." He gritted his teeth, his hand tightening on his rifle. She ignored him, pulling her own medkit. "I need to see it, Sergeant." "I'm fine, trainee," he hissed, but the word trainee had lost its sting. It was a reflex, nothing more. She met his gaze. The Arctic blue eyes were clouded with pain, but also with something else. A raw, desperate, shocking hope. He wasn't looking at his hider. He was looking at the only other friendly soldier on the mountain. She didn't ask again. She simply put her rifle down and knelt, her hands steady and mechanical, going to the shredded dressing. "This is going to hurt. Just do it," he gasped. As she worked, applying a new tourniquet above the wound, he spoke, his voice tight. "They came in, under the storm. Hit the comms, the barracks, all at once. Took us completely. I was the only one on the ridge. Got caught by one of their mortars." He looked at her, his eyes focused, desperate. "The QRF is scrambled, but they're 20 minutes out. And Scylla, they're setting up a gun." "A gun?" Cadwell pointed, not with his hand, but with his chin, toward the bunker's narrow observation slit. "Up there, the old watchtower, where we were supposed to take the test shot." Sharma moved to the slit, wiping the condensation from the thick ballistic glass. She peered out. The storm was still raging, but through the snow she could see it. The target area, 1,900 meters away. And on the wreckage of the tower, 3 Scylla members were working. They weren't setting up a sniper rifle. They were assembling a DSHK, a heavy machine gun. "They get that gun up," Cadwell said, his voice ragged. "It'll shred the QRF helos before they even get into the valley. They'll control the high ground. We're dead. The base is dead." He looked at her, his face a mask of pained resolve. "I can't make that shot, Sharma. I can't even hold a rifle steady." He was handing it to her. The test, the mission, everything. "QRF is 20 minutes out," he repeated. "You have to stop them. You're the only one who can." Sharma looked through the narrow slit of ballistic glass. The world was a 1,900-meter problem, veiled in white. The DSHK was a dark, angular shape, a spider on the skeleton of the old tower. I don't know," she whispered. The admission cost her. "The wind. It's not just a crosswind. It's a vortex. The canyon, the ridge, the math is impossible." She didn't say the word. "Then don't do the math." She turned. Cadwell was dragging himself across the concrete floor, his wounded leg leaving a wet, dark trail. He was moving toward Locke's pack, which she had dropped by the door. "Sergeant, don't move, you'll—" "Shut up," he grunted, his face pale and slick with sweat. He ripped the pack open, his hands shaking, not from weakness, but from pained effort. He pulled out the spotting scope, Locke's scope. He dragged himself to the observation slit, positioning himself below her. He grunted as he propped his back against the icy concrete, his injured legs stretched out, useless. He set up the spotter's tripod on his thigh, a horribly unstable platform. "I can't hold a rifle," he gasped, his teeth gritted. "But I can still run a scope. I'll call the wind. You just shoot, trainee." The word trainee was different now. It wasn't an insult. It was a designation, a role. The dynamic in the small, cold bunker shifted, settling into a new, terrible equilibrium. He was no longer the instructor. She was no longer the student. They were a team. A broken, desperate, two-person sniper team. Sharma moved back to the slit. She settled her rifle onto the concrete ledge. It was a solid platform. She deployed the bipod, the metal feet scraping on the stone. She pushed her body forward, the pain in her hip flaring, but she welcomed it. It was a focal point. She pressed her eye to the scope. The aluminum skeleton of the spotting scope dug into Cadwell's shoulder. Cold. Not training ground cold, but the deep, wet chill of exposure that settled in bone. He was shivering, but his hands on the focus wheel were steady. "Victor, this is Blackjack." He was on the SATCOM, his voice a low rasp. "Request Cass, danger close. Repeat, danger close. How copy?" Static hissed in her ear, a feed from his radio patched to her headset. Her breath hitched, fogging the optic. Don't fog the optic. She wiped it with her frozen glove, the rough wool catching on the elevation turret. She could smell the blood from his leg, a coppery, sharp tang that cut through the cold. The world was reduced to a 10x circle of gray rock and blowing snow. 3 targets. No, not targets. Threats. They were moving around the DSHK, locking the tripod down. One of them was hauling a green ammo can. They were moments from being operational. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the relentless, muffled sound of the wind. This wasn't the qualification course. The smell of cordite from her own rifle was real. The blood freezing on Cadwell's uniform was real. The radio crackled again, Cadwell's voice strained, terrified. "QRF is Winchester, out of fuel ordnance. They can't engage. They're transport only. It's on us. It's on you." He looked at her, his face inches from hers. "Sharma? If you read me, engage." She shifted the crosshairs. 1 mile was no longer a test. It was survival. A new sound joined the wind. A heavy, methodical thump, thump, thump. The DSHK. It was firing. Not at them. It was firing down into the valley, at the base, suppressing the survivors. The sound was a death knell. "They're operational," Cadwell hissed. "They see the helos on approach. You have to take them now." The HMG team was arrogant. They felt safe. They were 1,900 meters away, on the highest ground, in a blizzard. They were untouchable. They didn't know about her. The thump, thump, thump of the DSHK was a physical force. It wasn't aimed at them, but the sound traveled, a heavy, pounding rhythm of death that vibrated through the concrete bunker, up the bipod, and into Sharma's bones. Each thump was a reminder. The QRF was flying into that. "They're traversing," Cadwell hissed, his eye pressed to Locke's scope. "Firing on the barracks, now the landing zone. They're clearing the field. Sharma, I need a shot." Her mind was a vortex, just like the wind. 1,900 meters, uphill, sub-zero. The target was a man-sized shadow behind a gun shield, obscured by muzzle flash and blowing snow. "Wind," she said, her voice flat. "It's a nightmare," Cadwell spat. "I'm reading, full value, gusting to 40. The downdraft from the ridge is hitting a crosswind from the canyon. It's just chaos. Hold 4.5 mils left. 4.5. Send it." Sharma heard him. She processed the number. 4.5. It was an educated guess. An aggressive, desperate call from a man bleeding out, a man who believed in instinct. She didn't move. Her eye was on the snow, not the snow around her, but the snow downrange. She watched the vapor trail from the DSHK's heavy rounds. It was a faint, momentary line in the air, and it was bending hard at the 1,000-meter mark. But there was something else. She watched the tiny, almost invisible wisps of snow being kicked up from the rocks near the target. They weren't moving left. They were swirling, then dropping. A pocket. A dead air pocket right before the target, followed by a sharp updraft. Cadwell's call was wrong. It would compensate for the main wind, but it would be thrown off by that pocket. The round would sail high and right. "Sharma, send it!" Cadwell yelled, his voice cracking. She took a breath. She let it out. She stared at the wind, at the snow, at the math in her head. Trust the process. Locke's voice. "Negative," she said. The word hung in the tiny bunker, louder than the HMG. Cadwell turned, his face a mask of disbelief. "What did you say, trainee?" "Negative, Sergeant," she repeated, her voice perfectly calm, her eye never leaving the scope. "Your call is wrong. The downdraft is buffered at 1,500 meters. There's an updraft pocket just short of the target." "You can't possibly—" "I can," she said. She wasn't asking. She was telling. "I've been watching it." She saw it, the pattern, the meticulous, patient observation. The very thing he had called hesitation. It wasn't hesitation. It was certainty. Her hand, steady, moved to the elevation turret. Click, click, click. She dialed in the elevation. Her other hand moved to the windage turret. "Hold is 4.1 mils left," she stated. "Not 4.5, and 2 clicks down." "Down?" Cadwell's voice was incredulous. "In this wind? You'll hit the dirt. The updraft will catch it." "Sharma, that's insane. That's a guess." "No, Sergeant," she said. "It's the math." This was the moment. Not the firefight. Not the run. This. The click failure. The instructor challenging her. But this time, she wasn't a student. She looked away from the scope just for a second and met his eyes. The Arctic blue was wide with pain and fury. "It's my shot, Sergeant," she said. Cadwell stared at her. The seconds stretched. Thump, thump, thump. The QRF was getting closer. He saw the certainty in her eyes, the cold, hard, mathematical calm, the absence of doubt. He let out a ragged breath, a sound of surrender. He turned back to his scope. "Then take the damn shot," he whispered. Sharma nodded. She settled back behind her rifle. The world shrank. The noise of the DSHK faded. The pain in her hip faded. There was only the crosshair, the wind she had observed, and the calculation she trusted. She waited for the gunner to lean into the weapon, to feed a new belt. Now. She exhaled and pressed. The DSHK stopped. The sudden silence was more jarring than the gunfire. The gunner was upright, shouting at his assistant, who was fumbling with a new, heavy green ammo can. He was exposed. "Target!" Cadwell breathed, his voice a taut wire. Sharma's finger was already on the trigger. The crosshairs were steady on the gunner's chest. Her windage was set. 4.1 mils left. Her elevation. 2 clicks down. The solution felt wrong. It felt like jumping off a cliff, trusting the laws of physics to provide a thermal updraft. Trust the process. Thump, thump, thump. It was her own heart, hammering against her ribs. She let out half her breath, finding the calm, still center, the place where the math lived. Send it. She pressed. The boom was absolute. The rifle slammed back into her shoulder, a brutal, comforting kick. The muzzle flash momentarily blinded her, a brief orange sun in the gray. She did not blink. She held the trigger back, her body rigid, absorbing the recoil, her eye still welded to the scope. It was perfect shot follow-through. The target was gone, lost in the recoil. She was already cycling the bolt, up, back, forward, down, when the world swam back into focus. An agonizing, elastic stretch of time, 1,000, 1,000. The vapor trail of her own bullet was invisible in the snow. There was no way to track it. There was only waiting, 2.5 seconds. Cadwell beside her held his breath, a puff of red. It wasn't on the gunner. It was on the gun shield. Miss. No. The impact was a split second before the gunner crumpled. Her round had hit the assistant, passing clean through him and striking the DSHK's receiver. The gunner didn't fall from a bullet. He fell because his assistant collapsed onto him, and the gun was silent. Spot, Cadwell whispered. His voice was hollow, choked. Hit! Target! Target down! Sharma didn't move. She watched. The third Scylla member, the one who had been providing security, ran to the gun. He shoved the two bodies aside. He grabbed the charging handle. He was trying to clear the jam, to get it running again. Sharma centered the crosshairs on him. Click. The sound of her bolt locking. Breathe. Press. Boom. The rifle kicked. She cycled the bolt. Up. Back. Forward. Down. Back on target. The third man was gone. He hadn't just been hit. He had been thrown from the tower, a limp doll vanishing into the white Santa. This time it was real. The thump, thump, thump was gone. The only sound in the bunker was the static from the radio, the ragged, shallow breathing of Sergeant Cadwell, and the relentless, indifferent howl of the wind. It was over. A new sound joined the wind. A heavy, rhythmic whop, 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 growing louder. Birds! Cadwell rasped, his head falling back against the concrete wall. QRF, they're in the valley. He looked at her. His eyes were no longer Arctic blue. They were just tired, clouded with pain and a terrible, profound respect. Good shot, Sharma, he breathed. Sharma finally let go of the rifle. Her hands, when she pulled them away, were shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline, the rage, the cold, quiet certainty, it all evaporated at once, leaving a void. She didn't feel like a predator. She didn't feel like a hunter. She just felt cold. She rested her forehead against the icy concrete ledge of the observation slit, the smell of cordite and her own sweat filling her nostrils. The vibrations of the approaching helicopters were a distant promise. They were alive. Locke's sacrifice, her shots, Cadwell's guidance. It meant something. But as she closed her eyes, just for a second, she didn't see the victory. She saw Locke's blood in the snow. She saw the three men in the canyon, falling one by one. She saw the new, cold, empty room in her mind. She had passed the test. The helicopter blades were a physical assault. The whop, whop, whop was a hammer, beating against the concrete, vibrating up through her boots. The bunker was filled with blue and red flashing lights, painting the small space in a sickening, rhythmic strobe. Hands were on her, strong, fast. A medic, his face a grim mask, was shining a pinlight in her eyes. Trainee, can you hear me? How many fingers? Sharma stared. She didn't answer. Her ears were ringing. The medic's voice was a distant buzz under the rotor wash. She's in shock, he yelled to someone behind him. Let's get her packaged. He reached for her rifle. No. Her voice was a rasp, barely audible, but her hands, which had been shaking, locked onto the weapon's frame. Her grip was iron. "Son, I need to take your weapon," the medic said, his voice firm but gentle. "We're getting you out of here." He pulled. She pulled back. It was an instinctive, animalistic refusal. The rifle was part of her. It was the anchor. It was the weight that proved the last few hours had been real. "I said no," she repeated, her voice dead. "Medic!" A strained voice barked from across the bunker. "Leave it!" The medic looked over. 2 other PJs were carefully lifting Cadwell onto a lightweight stretcher. His face was a mask of white, translucent pain, but his eyes were clear, and they were fixed on Sharma. "Sir, procedure says—" "Procedure be damned," Cadwell hissed. "It's hers. She's earned it. Get me on that bird." The medic paused, looking from his bleeding instructor to the numb trainee clinging to her rifle. He made a choice. He nodded, sharp. "Fine. But you're walking. Can you walk?" Sharma didn't answer. She just stood, using the rifle as a crutch, her body a single unified ache. The pain in her hip was a white-hot spike. She stumbled out of the bunker and into the swirling chaos. 2 little birds were on the ground, their rotors spinning, kicking up a maelstrom of snow. QRF soldiers, clad in black, had formed a perimeter. The smell of helicopter exhaust and hot metal filled the air. She watched as they loaded Cadwell into the first helicopter. A second team of medics was moving past her, heading up the draw with a folded stretcher, going for Locke. Sharma stopped. She watched them go. They were moving toward the place where she had run, the place where Locke had bought her time with his life. It didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like a pass or a fail. It felt quiet. A vast, hollowed-out quiet that the helicopter blades couldn't touch. "Ma'am!" a soldier yelled, grabbing her arm. "We gotta go! We're not secure!" He guided her toward the second helicopter. She climbed in, her movements wooden, clumsy. She sat on the metal bench, her rifle held upright between her knees. As the helicopter lifted, the ground falling away, she looked out the open door. She saw the bunker. She saw the tracks in the snow. She saw the dark, distant shape of the watchtower, its DSHK silent. The bird carrying Cadwell banked, pulling alongside hers for a moment. He was strapped in, a medic working on him. He wasn't looking at the medic. He was looking at her, across the 100 feet of open, wind-blasted air. He didn't smile. He didn't say thank you. He didn't offer congratulations. He just held her gaze. And then he gave her a single, sharp nod. The nod of a professional, acknowledging another. The nod he would give an equal. It was all she needed. Sharma turned her face from the wind. She leaned her helmet against the cold aluminum bulkhead of the helicopter, closed her eyes, and let the darkness take her. She was no longer a recruit. She was a sniper. The debriefing room was white, sterile, and smelled of industrial cleaner. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, a sound like an insect trapped in glass, a stark, irritating contrast to the roar of the wind, which she could still hear in her memory. She sat at a plain metal table, her hands clasped on its surface. They were clean. A medic had scrubbed the blood, Cadwell's blood, and the gunpowder residue from under her nails. She was in a fresh, stiff utility uniform. A thick layer of tape was wrapped around her hip, a dull, hot throb beneath the fabric. A colonel entered. He was a man she had never seen before, his uniform crisp, his face lined with the exhaustion of a commander who had almost lost his command. He held a tablet. "Private Sharma," he said, his voice quiet. He sat opposite her. "I've just come from Sergeant Cadwell's post-op. He will keep the leg. He was emphatic. He wanted to write the after-action report himself. Sharma just nodded. The colonel looked at the tablet. 32 hostiles. Scylla mercenaries. Neutralized. Our comms are back up. The QRF you saved is mopping up the last of them. We almost lost this entire facility. Because of your actions. And those of Trainee Locke. We did not. He looked up from the screen, his eyes analytical, searching. Cadwell's report is light on details. He's not known for his prose. He said you engaged a 3-man team single-handedly. Locke bought me the time, she said. Her voice was flat, a stranger's voice. And the HMG, the colonel continued, leaning forward. 1,900 meters, uphill, in a blizzard. Cadwell states you overrode his correction. Sharma finally met his gaze. She thought of the wind, the math, the swirling snow. He was calling the main drift, she said, her voice quiet. He was right, but he couldn't see the pocket. The snow near the tower. It wasn't moving left. It was dropping, then rising. There was an updraft. I had to dial down. The colonel stared at her. He seemed to be looking for an explanation, for bravado, for instinct, for the hunter Cadwell always talked about. He found none. He found only a technician. An updraft? He repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes, sir. He was silent for a full minute. Then he pushed a small, black, rectangular case across the table. It was the kind of case that held a medal. The qualification course, he said, is officially concluded. All other teams were extracted. You were the only one to engage the target. Sharma looked at the case. She thought of the 90-second window, the click failure, the terror of the test. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt absurd, like a game played by children. I don't, she started. It wasn't a test. No, the colonel agreed, his voice softening. It wasn't. It was a battle. He opened the case for her. Inside, there was no metal. There was just a small black and green fabric tab, the simple, subdued patch of a U.S. Army sniper. You passed, Private, the colonel said. He stood. Sergeant Cadwell had one more thing he wanted me to tell you. He said, tell her. Good math. The colonel left. Sharma was alone again, in the white, sterile room, with the buzzing light. She did not pick up the tab. She just looked at her hands, resting on the table. They were the same hands that had scrubbed the ghillie suit, the same hands that had fumbled with the radio, the same hands that had cycled the bolt again and again. There was no glory in them, no honor. They were not the hands of a hero. They were the hands of a survivor. She had not won. She had endured. She had been the hider, the one who watched, the one who waited, the one who saw what others missed. She was the granite on the ridge, the quiet thing that had been there before the storm and was still there long after the thunder had passed. It was the only victory that mattered.